Chapter 11, Moving On with Poetry. Somehow I did get a job, finally, that could have made my parents satisfied. Everything was always about them. They never asked about anything that was happening to me, so they never inquired about why I was going for grief counseling, because they had no knowledge of this. Working as a software engineer/programmer, I got a job at the National Science Foundation as a contractor. I was developing a network for the museum, and that involved network programming in the C programming language. This was a job that represented me using the skills of an engineer. I would later learn that my parents felt like I owed it to them to work as an engineer because they paid for my education. They didn't see it from my point of view. They didn't care at all what I wanted in life. I had not asked them to pay for graduate school, but I assumed that they at least cared about me doing what made me happy. I should have known that they were not capable of that. It was my sister who decades later conveyed the knowledge that my parents felt like I owed it to them to work in a field they knew was of no interest to me. They weren't just trying to reason with me that I could make more money if I worked in a job that used the skills I learned at Georgia Tech. No, I owed it to them. It was an obligation, no matter what I actually wanted. So with the job at the National Science Foundation, I was a software engineer. I did accomplish a great deal in that job capacity, and my supervisor was very impressed with my talents. Again, this was not at all interesting to me. Yet, I was making sure that I successfully met all deadlines and deliverables. I vaguely remember a summer trip to Las Vegas. The company paid for this to cover some job-related training. It was amazing. I had this incredible per diem rate where I was paid my salary plus extra money for expenses that exceeded the cost of the Vegas hotel room. Vegas was probably the worst place for me to go with so much free cash and free drinks in the casinos. Somehow I made all the presentations for the training that I was sent there to attend. In the evenings and free time, I hit the casinos and made some decent money. Nothing to write home about. Gin or vodka was an escape, but somehow I didn't drink so much as to get sick at night, or even the next day. As I try to write this now, I have only momentary snapshots with no full-running narrative memory, just random disconnected sensations, my hands feeling unable to touch the leather inside a car, the sun shimmering on the pavement, casinos, drinks, sitting at a poker table, pulling a lever on a slot machine. I must have done what was expected of me. I don't remember any complaints from my boss. I moved through time like a robot. The job was going well, as I said. I was proud of how well I was doing. I was drinking more and more during this time period after the trip to Las Vegas. Everything except beer, vodka with tonic or orange juice, gin and tonic, whiskey with ice water or Coke, not so much wine. I was passing out, and once or twice I would vomit. I really hated throwing up, always. A meaningless connection with a lady. I met a woman from the home office of the company that was paying me. She lived in Alabama and I was in Augusta, Georgia. So we decided to meet in Atlanta, Georgia, where I had graduated not long before. My supervisor was joking that I had jungle fever because I was a white guy who was going to date a black woman. He was black as well. I didn't let that bother me. Spike Lee's film Jungle Fever had been out, and it was an important film. I have always been fine with having a conversation about race, if that was something that was desired. My mother actually asked about my date. I suppose the name of my date sounded ethnic, and my mother asked about that, guessing that she might be Italian. I said, no, she's black. I was proud of one thing about my ability to assert myself. My sister had heard the argument about how others wouldn't approve when she was going out on a few dates with a black guy. My mother knew not to waste her breath expressing her racist ideas by telling me that others wouldn't approve. No, her response was a simple "oh." And that was it. I remember that this was the first time I kissed anyone other than the brief kiss that Selta and I had shared back in December. This was extremely passionate. She brought her kid and left him in the car, parked near the Student Center at Georgia Tech, the same building where I had worked on the bottom floor in the post office. We were looking for someplace to sit or be as private as possible outside after dark. I remember making out at a few locations here and there. I could feel her large breasts against me, and I was aroused. My first passionate kiss before Lynn. We'll get to that later. Did I feel guilty about dating so soon after Kelta? Maybe, but I wasn't actually feeling much of anything during this time. I wasn't aware in any meaningful sense. I was so numb that I needed to feel something, to wake up. I was trying so hard to wake up. The tricyclic antidepressant made me feel artificially good for a few moments, but that didn't make life a meaningful experience. An antidepressant can't create meaning, hope, or escape from depression, nor could a passionate few moments with someone erase the deep and profound pain that characterized this time after my loss. Here's what struck me most. The intensity of that moment of passion with this woman was not as profoundly pleasurable as the overall experience of each quiet moment I had shared with Kelta. Every ordinary moment with Gelta, just sitting together, holding hands, looking into each other's eyes, had been more deeply satisfying than this intense physical encounter. That realization only deepened my sense of loss. My mother had made me feel so inadequate, and so had my father to some extent. This date was a way to get out of the house and to appear normal to my mother. If I was going out with someone from the company that employed my services, it made me appear less worthy of the criticism I had been getting from my parents. That's how I figured it. It was an escape. This wasn't meaningful. It was pleasurable, but hollow. There wasn't a second date. I had expressed my concerns about premarital sex. My boss at the company had given me a talk about making sure I had condoms. I was living under the weight of religious conditioning. Many Christians were having sex, but somehow, for me, it was not going to be acceptable to God. We weren't even in a committed relationship. I drove to Atlanta to meet her for a second date, but she never showed up after she heard that I wasn't ready for sex. I was frustrated and embarrassed for driving all the way to Atlanta. I don't know what I thought was going to happen, that we would get a hotel room and just kiss. After I realized she was not going to show up, I went back home. I just forgot the entire matter by the next day and never thought about it any further. The various medications and the alcohol impeded grieving and, dare I say, reality testing. People who are grieving are in such a state of denial that it is almost like a temporary psychosis. From what I was reading and hearing in the stories of grief that I studied, normal, healthy people did for a while embrace denial to such an extent that it bordered on delusional thinking. The loss of Kelta could not be washed away with alcohol, grief counseling, or an intimate encounter. Poetry as an outlet. I can thank my mother for introducing me to Martin Kirby, who went to our church and was a professor of English literature and related subjects at a college in Augusta, Georgia. He would become my writing and poetry mentor. It's so strange that my mother noticed my interest in poetry. I didn't think she noticed anything about me. I had given up a long time ago trying to gain her attention. Yet here she was introducing me to Martin and telling him about my interest in poetry. How did my mother even know this about me? Martin had not heard about my plans to be a social worker from my mother, nor did he learn about the love and the loss I experienced until I shared those things with him and his wife. I would show up on a regular basis for poetry readings at Martin's home with his wife, where I shared my poetry and received feedback, advice, and guidance on writing good poetry. He also listened as I read poems about my experience with Kelta and heard me talk about my relationship with her. This was very helpful because I had no other outlet for this, no other place to talk about Kelta and what we had shared. He said he thought it would take about 10 years for me to be able to write good poetry about Kelta because the feelings were too raw. The only ones listening to my stories about Celta were Martin Kirby and his wife, as well as the attendees at the grief support group. Again, my parents were not interested in learning anything about what mattered to me. They never seemed to have any awareness that I was even going to grief counseling. This is so utterly astonishing. I had not deliberately been trying to keep what was happening to me a secret. On the contrary, I looked for an opening to discuss the matter. I wanted to repair and improve our relationship. I wanted to share the fact that I had found someone who loved me. With all this going on, all the problems I was having, I began to doubt that I could achieve my goals in life, my career goals. I wondered how I could help others when I had so many problems myself, problems just living life. It should be noted that while I was put on a major tranquilizer, my psychiatrist never said he thought I was psychotic. We knew I had problems coping with overwhelming stressors. The tragic loss of Kelta did not erase the positive impact she had on my life. There were other positive experiences during this time. I had become more confident about the role I was pursuing in the back of my mind for so long, that of a psychiatric social worker. My work with the social work team at Georgia Regional Hospital had increased my social skills and affirmed that becoming a social worker in the psychiatric field was the right match for me. Finally. And yet, beneath that fragile layer of progress, a storm raged on. Grief would not be soothed by poetry or ambition alone. At home, the silence around Kelta's name grew heavier by the day, and my body began to betray me in ways I could neither predict nor control. Another takeaway from what I experienced over more than a year is that the pleasurable encounter with a lady was like what the tricyclic antidepressant did. It created a moment of pleasure among the underlying pain and grief. Transitory, meaningless, perhaps artificial pleasure.